Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a journey back in time. Not to a whimsical land of flowers and fancy dinners, but into the surprisingly stark and practical world of Viking Age romance. Imagine the biting Scandinavian wind, the smell of wood smoke and damp earth, and the constant thrum of a society where survival was paramount. You're looking for a partner, but it's less about grand gestures and more about advantageous alliances. You probably won't survive this journey with your romantic ideals intact, because dating in the Viking Age was often less The Notebook and more Game of Thrones. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You find yourself in a bustling longhouse, the smoky air thick with the scent of cooking meat and the murmur of conversation. People are moving about, engaged in chores, crafting, or simply sharing stories. You're a young Viking, perhaps just coming of age, and the whispers about finding a partner are beginning to swirl around you. But forget what you know about modern dating apps or awkward first dates over coffee. In the Viking Age, the concept of a romantic date, as we understand it, simply didn't exist. Instead, you'd navigate a complex social landscape where the romance of the raid was less about personal affection and more about cold, hard strategy. A mainstream historical fact is that marriages in the Viking Age were primarily strategic alliances between families, designed to secure economic benefits, political influence, or social standing. Love, if it developed at all, was often a happy byproduct, not the driving force behind the union. Imagine your parents, or the head of your extended family, openly discussing your suitability as a match for a neighboring family's son or daughter, analyzing their land, their wealth, and their reputation. You might joke that your matchmaker was essentially a real estate agent with a really sharp axe. The raid and romance of the raid isn't just a metaphor for the transactional nature of these unions. It also subtly hints at the often violent backdrop against which these relationships formed. While not every marriage was a result of literal abduction, though that did happen, particularly with thralls or slaves, the acquisition of a spouse could involve complex negotiations, feuds, or even displays of strength. A man might prove his worth through deeds of valor, through successful trading voyages, or through acquiring wealth in raids. These were the qualities that made him desirable as a husband, not his charming smile or witty banter. Consider the role of reputation, or VT. Your family's standing, your own deeds, whether farming, crafting, or fighting, and your general character were under constant scrutiny. A good reputation made you a more attractive prospect. Conversely, a poor reputation, perhaps from cowardice or dishonesty, could severely limit your options. You were part of a collective, and your actions reflected on your entire family. Historians still argue whether individual attraction played any significant role in the initial stages of Viking Age courtship, or if it was entirely dictated by familial and economic considerations. While sagas sometimes depict love at first sight, these accounts are often highly stylized and romanticized, not necessarily reflective of everyday reality. The truth likely lies somewhere in the middle. Practical considerations were paramount, but an individual's charisma or physical appeal might, in some cases, swing the balance in an otherwise suitable match. A quirkier tidbit is that prospective grooms sometimes had to demonstrate their prowess or wealth by providing hospitality or gifts to the bride's family. A sort of pre-engagement audition. Imagine having to impress your potential in-laws not with your charm, but with how many barrels of ale you could provide for a feast. So, as you observe the interactions around you, you begin to understand that finding a partner in the Viking Age wasn't a personal quest for soulmates. It was a societal function, a strategic move in the grand game of survival and advancement for your lineage. The romance was often in the successful negotiation, the secured alliance, and the promise of a strong, prosperous future for your family, rather than in the flutter of a heart and as the fire crackles in the longhouse hearth, casting long shadows. You feel the pragmatic chill of a world where even love was a matter of grim calculation. As you grasp the strategic nature of finding a partner in the Viking Age, you'll quickly realize that your personal feelings, while not entirely irrelevant, were certainly secondary to the immense influence of your family's heavy hand. Marriage was not a private affair between two individuals, but a public, binding contract negotiated and approved by the heads of powerful households. Imagine your father, your uncle, or the most respected elder in your family, sitting across from the head of another prominent family. They are not discussing your feelings or your compatibility. They are negotiating the terms of your future. This is the munder, or bride price, and the heft, or dowry. A mainstream historical fact is that in Viking society, marriages were typically arranged by the families of the prospective bride and groom, with negotiations focusing on property, wealth, and alliances. You might joke that your parents had a mergers and acquisitions department, and you were the product being acquired. For a young woman, your family's reputation and wealth were paramount. A well-connected and prosperous family could secure a better match for their daughter, offering her greater security and status. For a young man, demonstrating his own prowess, whether in farming, craftsmanship, or raiding, was crucial to convincing a respected family that he was a worthy suitor. Your family's honor was tied to yours, and a good marriage reflected well on everyone. The negotiations could be complex and drawn out. They involved a careful assessment of each family's resources, their history of feuds or alliances, and their standing in the community. Every aspect of the arrangement would be meticulously discussed: what property the bride would bring her dowry, what compensation the groom's family would offer the bride price, and any other conditions of the union. It was a contractual agreement, binding both families, not just the individuals. Historians still argue whether women had any real agency in these arranged marriages. While sources suggest that a woman's consent was generally required for a marriage to be legally valid, she had to be given with her consent. This consent might be heavily influenced by family pressure or the perceived benefits of the match. It's unlikely that a young woman could outright refuse a highly advantageous match arranged by her powerful family without facing severe social repercussions. You were a valuable asset, and your family was deploying you strategically. A quirkier tidbit sometimes. A prospective groom might prove his manliness or worthiness by engaging in a public display of strength, like wrestling, or even by reciting poetry if he was a skald, a poet to impress the bride's family. So, your pre-wedding show might have involved a strongman contest or a rap battle, Viking style. Once the families reached an agreement, formal engagement ceremonies would take place, often involving feasts and the exchange of symbolic gifts. This solidified the contract, making it difficult for either side to back out without incurring significant dishonor or financial penalties. Breaking an engagement was a serious matter, potentially leading to feuds or legal disputes. The heavy hand of the family extended beyond the initial marriage arrangements. Even after marriage, your family would remain a crucial support network, offering protection, advice, and a place of refuge if your marriage ran into trouble. Conversely, your actions as a spouse reflected on your family's honor, ensuring you adhered to societal expectations. So, as you listen to the elders discussing your future, you feel the invisible, yet incredibly strong ties of kinship guiding your path, your love life, or rather, your future partnership, is fundamentally a family enterprise designed to strengthen the collective rather than fulfill individual romantic desires. It's a world where personal happiness is hoped for, but family stability is the true prize. And your family's heavy hand ensures you walk that predetermined path. With your family's heavy hand guiding your path. The concept of marriage in the Viking Age quickly boils down to a fundamental economic transaction, the bride price bargain. This wasn't about haggling over livestock. It was a formal, legally binding negotiation that secured the financial and social standing of the union. Imagine the tension in the longhouse during the negotiation phase. It's not just about two individuals, but two powerful families. Your male relatives, typically your father or guardian, would formally present you. The prospective bride, the suitor, or his male representatives, would then discuss the munder, often translated as bride price or mourning gift. A mainstream historical fact is that the munder was a payment from the groom or his family to the bride's family, signifying that the groom was taking responsibility for the bride's support and protecting her from destitution. It was a form of security for the woman, ensuring her future well-being within the new household. You might joke that your worth was literally being tallied in silver and sheep, which, frankly, sounds a lot less complicated than dating app algorithms. The munder was not considered a purchase of the bride, as some might mistakenly believe. Instead, it was a guarantee, a form of financial security for the bride in case of divorce or her husband's death. It also compensated her family for the loss of her labor and for the transfer of their familial rights over her. The amount of the munder would vary significantly based on the social standing and wealth of the families involved. A chieftain's daughter would command a far higher munder than a farmer's daughter. The negotiations for the munder could be as intricate as any trade deal. They would consider not only the groom's immediate wealth, land, livestock, silver, valuable goods like weapons or jewelry, but also his family's overall reputation, their alliances, and their long-term prospects. A family would want to ensure their daughter was entering a stable and prosperous union. This wasn't just about the current moment. It was about the future security of a new branch of the family tree. Historians still argue whether the munder truly empowered women by providing them with financial security, or if it primarily served to reinforce patriarchal control by treating them as valuable commodities in family negotiations. While it did provide a measure of protection, it also made marriage a highly economic rather than purely personal decision for the groom. The payment of the munder was a significant investment and a public demonstration of his ability to provide for a wife and future family. It was a point of pride and a clear signal of his commitment for the bride. While she didn't directly receive the munder, it went to her family. Its value reflected her family's standing and her own desirability as a future wife. A quirkier tidbit is that the munder sometimes wasn't paid all at once, but in installments, or might be tied to specific conditions, like the birth of children. This made the contract even more complex, creating ongoing obligations between the two families long after the wedding feast. Imagine having your future tied to a payment plan. Once the munder was agreed upon, it was typically sealed with oaths and witnessed by prominent members of both families and the community, making it legally binding. This entire process underscored that marriage was not a private decision, but a public, contractual agreement with significant social and economic ramifications for all involved. It was a formal acknowledgement of the new family unit being formed and its place within the wider community. So, as you watch the solemn faces of the negotiators, you understand that your future isn't being built on fleeting emotion, but on solid financial ground. The bride price bargain isn't about grand romance. It's about mutual benefit, secured lineage, and ensuring that everyone involved knows exactly what is being gained and lost. It's a pragmatic approach to partnership, designed for survival and prosperity in a harsh, demanding world, where even love eventually has to pay its dues. As the bride price bargain solidifies your future, you come to understand that your material contributions to the marriage were just as crucial as the groom's. This leads us to the critical role of dowry and inheritance rules, concepts that significantly shaped a woman's desirability, her status within her marriage, and her ultimate security in Viking society. Imagine yourself, not just as a person, but as a walking portfolio of assets. Your family wouldn't just send you off with the clothes on your back. You would bring a heft, or dowry, which was a collection of goods and property transferred from your family to you upon marriage. A mainstream historical fact is that in Viking Age Scandinavia, women typically brought a dowry known as heft, or heimafylgja, into their marriage, which remained her personal property and could not be alienated by her husband without her consent. You might joke that your wedding registry was actually a detailed inventory of livestock, looms, and silver bracelets. This dowry was not absorbed into your husband's family wealth. Crucially, it remained your property. It might include household goods, such as tools, furniture, textiles, and jewelry, or even land and livestock. This gave you a significant degree of economic independence within your marriage. If your husband died, or if the marriage ended in divorce, Your dowry ensured you had resources to fall back on, preventing you from becoming destitute. This legal protection was remarkably progressive for the era. Your dowry was a testament to your family's status and their ability to provide for you. A substantial dowry made you a more attractive bride, as it enhanced the financial standing of the new household you were forming. It was a tangible asset that underscored your value as a partner, not just a wife. For men, marrying a woman with a good dowry could significantly boost their own economic prospects and social standing. Beyond the dowry, Viking inheritance laws also offered women a surprising degree of autonomy. Daughters could inherit property, though usually less than sons, and widows had specific rights to their deceased husband's property. If you became a widow, you might retain control over your dowry, your mourning gift, a payment from the husband to the wife after the consummation of the marriage, often given the morning after, and a share of your husband's estate. This meant that a widowed woman could, in some cases, become a powerful landowner and a significant economic force in her own right. Historians still argue whether these property rights truly translated into widespread social power for women, or if they were often limited by cultural norms and the practical difficulties of asserting legal claims. A quirkier tidbit is that valuable items in a woman's dowry, particularly jewelry like brooches or necklaces, weren't just decorative. They served as tangible proof of her wealth and were often passed down through generations of women, becoming symbols of family lineage and status. So your fancy bling wasn't just for show. It was essentially your personal savings account. The legal frameworks around women's property rights are well documented in the Icelandic sagas and early Norse law codes, such as the Graga's Grey Goose laws. These codes clearly stipulate a woman's right to control her dowry and other property, even during marriage, and her rights in cases of divorce or widowhood. This legal protection meant that while families arranged marriages, the woman herself entered the union with a degree of economic security that was unusual in many other parts of medieval Europe. So, as you review the contents of your future dowry, you feel a quiet sense of empowerment. While your choice in marriage may have been limited, your legal and economic standing within that marriage is robust. Your property isn't just something you own, it's a foundation for your future, a safeguard against destitution, and a testament to your family's commitment to your well-being. The dowry and inheritance rules in the Viking Age made you a valuable economic partner, ensuring that even in a world of arranged marriages, you brought more to the table than just your hand. With the economic terms of your union secured by the dowry and bride price, the courtship process itself was less about whispered sweet nothings and more about formal gifts, tokens, and promises. These tangible exchanges were not just symbolic. They were binding agreements that publicly affirmed the commitment between the families and the prospective couple. Imagine a scene where the groom, or his representative, formally presents a gift to you, the bride. This isn't a casual bouquet of flowers. This gift is part of the formal engagement, a visible token of the promises being made. It might be a valuable piece of jewelry, like a silver arm ring or a finely crafted brooch, or perhaps a significant amount of silver coinage. A mainstream historical fact is that in Viking Age courtship, the exchange of gifts was a crucial part of formalizing an engagement, serving as tangible proof of the agreement and the wealth being exchanged. You might joke that instead of, "Will you marry me?" it was more like, "Here's some shiny stuff. Now let's make this legally binding." These gifts were not given on a whim. They were part of a structured process, often discussed and agreed upon during the initial negotiations between the families. The value and nature of the gifts reflected the social standing of the families and the seriousness of the commitment for a prospective groom. Offering a generous and appropriate gift demonstrated his wealth, his ability to provide, and his respect for the bride's family. For the bride, receiving such a gift was a public affirmation of her desirability and the honor being bestowed upon her. Beyond the initial engagement gifts, there was also the mourning gift morgengifu, given by the groom to the bride after the consummation of the marriage, typically on the morning after the wedding night. This gift was distinct from the bride price which went to her family and her dowry which she brought. The mourning gift was legally the wife's personal property, designed to provide her with further financial security. It often consisted of valuable personal items, jewelry, or even specific lands. Historians still argue whether these gift exchanges represented a form of transactional control over women, or if they were an integral part of a legal system designed to provide women with economic security and a recognized social status within marriage. While they certainly underscored the economic aspect of marriage, the fact that property often remained with the woman provided a degree of autonomy. The promises exchanged during courtship and engagement were equally binding. These were not vague declarations of love, but formal oaths witnessed by family members and community leaders. Such promises, often sworn on sacred objects like a ring or a sword, carried immense weight in a society where honor and reputation were paramount. Breaking such a promise could lead to severe social ostracism, financial penalties, or even blood feuds. Imagine the gravity of these vows, knowing they were backed by the full force of community expectation and legal tradition. A quirkier tidbit: archaeological finds have revealed elaborate Viking Age jewelry, such as large, intricate brooches, which were likely worn by women and could have served as visible symbols of their marital status and the wealth they brought into a union. Essentially, a very fancy engagement ring and wedding band all rolled into one. These gift exchanges and formal promises served to publicly formalize the union long before any religious ceremony. They established the financial foundations of the marriage and created obligations that extended beyond the immediate couple to their respective families. It was a clear, unambiguous process, leaving little room for misinterpretation or casual commitment. So, as you receive a gleaming silver arm ring, the weight of the metal feels heavy in your hand, a tangible symbol of your impending union. This is not just a present, it's a contract, a promise, and a statement of worth in the Viking Age. Courtship was a serious, well-defined process where gifts, tokens, and promises built the framework for a marriage, ensuring that everyone involved understood the very real, binding terms of the agreement, long before any potential affection might bloom. With the formal exchanges of gifts and promises solidifying your engagement, you might find yourself navigating a more unusual aspect of Viking Age unions, the concept of trial marriage customs, while not universal. Some regions or social groups practice temporary arrangements before committing to a lifelong bond, a pragmatic approach to partnership that speaks volumes about their societal values. Imagine two families agreeing to a preliminary period where a couple would live together as if married, but without the full legal and religious solemnities of a formal wedding. This wasn't a casual shacking up in the modern sense. It was a recognized, albeit less binding, social arrangement. A mainstream historical fact is that there is archaeological and textual evidence suggesting that some Viking Age societies practiced forms of temporary or probationary unions, sometimes referred to as hand fasting or similar customs, which allowed couples to live together and test their compatibility before a full, legally binding marriage. You might joke that they had beta tests for spouses, which, considering the stakes, actually sounds pretty smart. The purpose of such a trial marriage was often practical. It allowed a couple to assess their personal compatibility, their ability to work together on a farm or manage a household, and, crucially, to determine fertility. In a society where producing heirs was paramount for family continuity, a trial period could reveal if the woman was able to conceive and carry a child to term. If a pregnancy occurred, it often led to the formalization of the marriage. If not, or if other insurmountable incompatibilities arose, the union could be dissolved more easily than a full marriage, often without the same social stigma or financial complexities. Historians still argue whether these trial marriages were widespread or confined to specific regions, social classes, or time periods within the Viking Age. Evidence is scattered across sagas and law codes, which sometimes describe what appears to be temporary cohabitation arrangements preceding full marriage. It's also debated whether these temporary unions offer genuine freedom to opt out, or if social pressures still heavily pushed towards formalization once a trial period began. For the woman, a trial marriage offered a chance to assess her prospective husband's character, his treatment of her, and his abilities as a provider. For the man, it was an opportunity to evaluate his future wife's industriousness, her temperament, and her capabilities as a household manager. It was a pragmatic risk assessment for both parties. In a time when a bad marriage could have dire consequences for one's life and lineage. A quirkier tidbit: some legal texts mention specific terms for dissolving these temporary unions, including agreed-upon compensation if children were born, but the marriage was not formalized. This shows a legal recognition of these arrangements and an attempt to protect the interests of all parties involved, especially any offspring. Imagine a prenuptial agreement for a trial marriage. Now that's commitment to pragmatism. While the concept of personal choice in a love match was still largely absent, trial marriages introduced a degree of practical assessment that was not present in purely arranged, immediate, binding unions. It allowed for a more informed decision before committing to a lifetime. However, it also carried its own risks. If a trial marriage ended, particularly for the woman, it might impact her reputation or her prospects for a future. More formal marriage, especially if children were born outside of a formalized union. So, as you consider the possibility of entering such a temporary arrangement, you feel a mixture of apprehension and perhaps a subtle sense of agency. This isn't dating as you know it, but it's a step towards understanding whether this vital partnership is truly viable before the full weight of legal and social expectations descends upon you. In the Viking Age, even the most intimate bonds were subject to a rigorous, often public, trial, ensuring that unions were built on practical foundations, not just fleeting hopes, even if the pragmatic arrangements of trial marriage didn't quite cut it. And perhaps you were seeking a little extra edge in the highly strategic world of Viking Age partnerships. You might turn to something far less tangible, and far more risky: love potions and satyr. These were not romantic gestures, but desperate attempts to influence fate and attraction through ancient magic. Imagine yourself, perhaps frustrated by the lack of progress in a desired match, or yearning for the affection of someone seemingly out of reach. You might seek out a Velva, a female shaman or seer, known for her mastery of cedar, a powerful and often feared form of Old Norse magic. A mainstream historical fact is that magic, including forms of divination, prophecy, and spells, played a significant role in Viking Age society, influencing beliefs about health, success, and even personal relationships. You might joke that your dating coach was a mystical hermit who brewed questionable elixirs. The purpose of these love potions was rarely about true, mutual affection as we understand it. Instead, they aimed to compel desire, to create an unnatural attraction, or to bind someone to you against their will. This was often seen as manipulative and ethically dubious, even within Viking society, and those who practiced cedar could be viewed with a mixture of awe and suspicion. The sagas often portray cedar as having both beneficial and detrimental effects, capable of powerful transformations but also dangerous curses. These potions might be concocted from various herbs, roots, animal parts, or even bodily fluids, often mixed with potent magical incantations and rituals. They could be administered subtly, perhaps mixed into food or drink, or more overtly, through charms and spells performed on an object belonging to the desired person. Imagine the eerie glow of a fire, the chanting whispers, and the pungent smell of strange ingredients as a vulva prepares a concoction meant to bend another's will to yours. Historians still argue whether the use of such love magic was widespread or confined to specific desperate situations, and how much faith people truly put into their efficacy versus merely trying every possible avenue. While some sagas describe instances of love charms, they also often show them backfiring spectacularly, leading to tragic or violent outcomes, which suggests a societal awareness of the inherent dangers and moral ambiguity involved. A quirkier tidbit: cider rituals often involved a state of trance, achieved through chanting or rhythmic drumming, allowing the practitioner to communicate with spirits or perceive future events. A love spell might involve invoking specific deities or spirits associated with fertility or passion, hoping to enlist their aid in bending fate. So, your attempt at romance might involve summoning ancient beings and going on a spiritual journey. The risks associated with satyr were significant. If discovered, you could face accusations of witchcraft, a grave offense that could lead to ostracism, legal penalties, or even execution. Furthermore, Using magic to influence someone's will was morally questionable and could lead to resentment, feuds, or violent retaliation if the target discovered your actions. The sagas are full of examples where such magical interventions led to bitterness, betrayal, and even death. Ultimately, turning to love potions and cedar was a desperate gamble, a sign that the more conventional paths to partnership had failed or seemed insufficient. It underscored the high stakes of finding a suitable mate in Viking society, where the natural course of negotiation and family alliance might be deemed too slow or too uncertain, pushing individuals towards forbidden, dangerous means to achieve their desires. So, as you ponder the flickering shadows of the vulva's hut, the pungent odors of her herbs, and the whispered incantations, you feel a chill, both from the cold air and from the unsettling nature of the magic. This is not about a charming first impression. It's about coercing destiny in the Viking Age. Sometimes the desperate desire for a partner pushed people beyond the bounds of accepted social norms, into the terrifying, unpredictable realm of ancient sorcery, where even love could be a dangerous, manipulated force, beyond the whispered incantations of cedar and the pragmatic negotiations. Our understanding of Viking Age relationships, including what might be considered love, comes largely from the captivating, yet complex, world of the saga's romantic echoes. These epic Icelandic tales, while not always literal historical accounts, offer invaluable glimpses into societal values, ideals of partnership, and the often tragic or violent outcomes of romantic pursuits. Imagine listening to a skald poet recite a saga in a dimly lit longhouse, his voice rising and falling with the drama of the tale. You hear stories of mighty warriors and resourceful women, of fierce loyalties and bitter feuds, and often of powerful attractions that defy societal norms or lead to tragic consequences. A mainstream historical fact is that the Icelandic sagas, written centuries after the Viking Age but preserving oral traditions, often portray intense romantic relationships, though these are frequently intertwined with themes of honor, revenge, and destiny. Rather than purely emotional bliss, you might joke that their version of a rom-com often ended with someone getting an axe to the face. The romance in sagas is rarely about hearts and flowers. It's often characterized by fierce loyalty, unwavering commitment in the face of adversity, and a deep respect for a partner's strength and capabilities. A man might be drawn to a woman's sharp wit, her independent spirit, or her ability to manage a complex household, as much as her physical beauty. Women, in turn, might admire a man's courage, his wealth, his rhetorical skills, or his ability to protect his family. However, these romantic echoes are often steeped in violence and fate. Love triangles frequently escalate into deadly feuds, forcing individuals to choose between their affections and their family loyalties. Characters are often driven by wired fate or orlog destiny, meaning that even the most passionate love might be predestined for a tragic end. Imagine a saga where a couple's love is so strong it sparks a multi-generational blood feud, making it impossible for them to ever truly be together. That's Viking romance for you. Historians still argue about the extent to which the romantic relationships depicted in the sagas reflect real-life experiences versus idealized literary conventions. While sagas are rich sources for understanding cultural values and legal practices, their dramatic narratives often exaggerate or embellish for storytelling purposes, making it difficult to discern everyday reality. A quirkier tidbit: women in sagas are sometimes portrayed as having considerable agency in relationships, even instigating divorces or encouraging their male relatives to seek revenge if they feel wronged. This suggests that while arranged marriages were the norm, women were not always passive figures in their relationships. They could be strong-willed and assertive. So, your ideal saga heroine might be less a damsel in distress and more a strategic mastermind. These sagas also highlight the importance of reputation and honor in relationships. A breach of promise, an act of infidelity, or a failure to defend one's family honor could lead to severe social ostracism or violent retaliation. The public perception of a relationship, and how it reflected on the families involved, often outweighed the private feelings of the individuals. So, as you listen to the rhythmic cadence of the saga, You hear echoes of intense human connection, but filtered through a lens of pragmatic survival and unyielding fate. The grand passions are there, but they are intertwined with violence, loyalty, and the inescapable demands of a harsh world. The sagas offer a glimpse into the Viking heart, a place where love was fierce and potent, but rarely simple or straightforward, often leading to glory or ruin, but rarely a quiet, happy ending. Beyond the epic tales of the sagas, you might wonder about the practical realities of intimate relationships in the Viking Age, particularly concerning sexual freedom limited. While not a period of unbridled permissiveness, Viking society had different norms regarding premarital and extramarital relationships compared to later Christianized Europe. Imagine a young couple, perhaps engaged, spending time together. While formal marriage involved elaborate rituals, premarital sexual activity wasn't necessarily a scandal, especially if it was understood to lead to a legitimate union. A mainstream historical fact is that premarital sexual relationships appear to have been tolerated to some extent in Viking Age Scandinavia, particularly if a marriage was intended and later formalized. Often encouraged by the custom of trial marriages we discussed earlier, you might joke that their version of getting to know you involved fewer awkward dinner conversations and more direct physical engagement. For men, a certain degree of sexual freedom before marriage seems to have been more widely accepted. Proving one's virility was part of demonstrating fitness for marriage and fatherhood. For women, however, the situation was more nuanced. While premarital sex wasn't always strictly condemned if it led to marriage, a woman's honor and the legitimacy of her offspring were still closely tied to her marital status. If a woman had many casual partners or bore children outside of a recognized union, her reputation could suffer, impacting her prospects for a good marriage. Extramarital affairs, especially for married women, were generally viewed much more harshly. Fidelity was expected within marriage, particularly from the wife, as it directly impacted the legitimacy of heirs. An affair by a married woman could lead to severe consequences, including divorce, public shaming, or even violence, as it could cast doubt on the paternity of her children and thus the purity of the family line. For a man, extramarital affairs were tolerated to a greater extent, especially if they resulted in the birth of children to a thrall slave or concubine, a topic we'll explore later. Historians still argue whether the apparent sexual freedom in Viking society was truly egalitarian, or if it primarily reflected a double standard, where men had greater latitude than women. While some evidence suggests a more relaxed attitude towards sexuality than in later periods, the social and economic consequences for women who defied norms were often more severe. A quirkier tidbit: archaeological findings, such as phallic amulets or fertility symbols, suggest an open attitude towards sexuality and fertility as natural forces. These weren't necessarily for dating in the modern sense, but reflect a culture where procreation and physical aspects of life were openly acknowledged and even celebrated. So, their equivalent of a conversation starter might have been a very direct symbol of fertility. Rape was, of course, a grave crime, punishable by law and often leading to feuds. Consent, while understood differently than today, was a recognized legal concept within their framework. However, the dynamics of power, especially concerning thralls or women captured during raids, meant that consent could be highly coerced or entirely absent, leading to horrific realities that contrast sharply with any idealized notions of freedom. So, as you consider the intimate lives of Vikings, you realize that sexual freedom was a landscape marked by both surprising openness and strict societal boundaries. It wasn't a free-for-all. It was governed by norms that prioritized lineage, family honor, and the pragmatic need for heirs, while premarital exploration might have been accepted in certain contexts. Defying the established order, particularly for women, could lead to severe and lasting repercussions. In the Viking Age, even the most private aspects of life were inextricably linked to the very public demands of reputation and lineage. Having explored the nuanced landscape of sexual freedom in the Viking Age, let's now delve into a surprisingly progressive aspect of their legal and social structure: divorce rights. His grievances. Unlike many other medieval societies where divorce was rare and almost exclusively initiated by men, Viking women had notable legal grounds to initiate the dissolution of a marriage, though not without societal judgment. Imagine a scene in a longhouse where a woman stands before witnesses, formally declaring her intention to divorce her husband. This wasn't a hushed, shameful affair, but a public, legal act. A mainstream historical fact is that early Norse law codes, particularly those from Iceland, explicitly granted women the right to initiate divorce on several grounds, a stark contrast to contemporary Christian Europe where divorce was largely forbidden. You might joke that their family court was a lot more efficient than some modern ones, at least for the women. What constituted valid grounds for a woman to seek a divorce? Several situations were recognized. One common ground was the husband's failure to financially support his wife or to provide for the household. If he was deemed lazy, wasteful, or simply incapable of providing for his family, a wife could seek a divorce. Another significant ground was physical abuse. If a husband beat his wife, she had legal recourse to end the marriage. This highlights a degree of protection for women against domestic violence that was uncommon elsewhere. Perhaps one of the most intriguing grounds for divorce was a husband's impotency or his inability to perform sexually. If a marriage remained unconsummated, or if the husband was unable to fulfill his marital duties, a wife could initiate divorce. This also extended to certain forms of cross-dressing, if a husband wore effeminate clothing or acted in ways considered unmanly. It could be grounds for divorce, as it cast a shadow on his masculinity and, by extension, the family's honor. Imagine telling your husband that his fashion choices were grounds for a legal split. While women had these rights, men also had grounds for divorce. A husband could divorce his wife for infidelity, for wasteful spending of household resources, or if she brought shame upon his family. In either case, the dissolution of a marriage was a serious matter, often involving the division of property and the custody of children. Disputes could be brought before local assemblies or things, where legal experts and community leaders would hear the case. Historians still argue whether the relative ease of divorce in Viking society genuinely empowered women, or if it simply reflected a pragmatic approach to unproductive or harmful unions, ensuring that lineages could continue without impediment. While it offered women more options than in many other cultures, divorce still carried a social stigma, especially if it was a contentious one. A quirkier tidbit, the formal act of divorce for a woman often involved declaring her intention before witnesses, sometimes at the threshold of the home or the couple's bed, to publicly signal the separation. This public declaration was crucial to its legal validity, making the private pain of a broken marriage a very public spectacle. The financial implications of divorce were significant. As we discussed earlier, a woman retained her dowry heft upon divorce, and often her mourning gift morgengifu as well, ensuring her financial independence. This economic safety net gave women a practical means to leave an unhappy or abusive marriage. Rather than being trapped by economic dependence, children typically remained with the father, but the mother often retained visitation rights, and the father had an obligation to support them. So, as you listen to the arguments for a marital split, you are struck by the surprisingly robust legal protections afforded to women in Viking society. While love might not have been the foundation of marriage, the laws provided a path out of unbearable unions, especially for women. The complexities of divorce, her rights. His grievances reveal a society that, despite its rough edges, recognized a woman's right to exit a marriage that failed to meet certain practical and personal standards, a remarkable legal precedent for the medieval world. While the Viking Age offered surprising flexibility in terms of divorce, another aspect of marital life, particularly for wealthier or powerful men, often complicated family structures, polygamy, and concubinage. This practice allowed some men to have multiple partners, creating a hierarchy of relationships that deeply affected women's status and security. Imagine a chieftain, a powerful landowner or warrior, with a legitimate wife and several other women living in his household who are not formally married to him. These might be concubines, or even thralls, slaves with whom he has children. A mainstream historical fact is that while monogamy was the most common form of marriage in the Viking Age, particularly for economic reasons among the general population, wealthy and powerful men sometimes engaged in polygamous relationships or took concubines, especially before the widespread adoption of Christian norms. You might joke that their family tree looked less like a tree and more like a very complicated bush for the primary, legitimate wife. The presence of concubines or other partners would undoubtedly be a source of personal and social tension. While her position as the legal wife was paramount, her children were the legitimate heirs to the family's wealth and status. She would still share her husband's attention, and perhaps even his affections with other women. Her status was derived from the formal marriage contract, the munder, and the dowry, which set her apart. Concubines, often women of lower social standing or even thralls, held a less secure position, while they might bear children for the man. These children typically did not have the same inheritance rights as those born to the legitimate wife. However, a quirkier tidbit is that children born to concubines, if acknowledged by the father, were often still considered free and could even be granted some inheritance, though usually a lesser share than legitimate heirs. This was a notable difference from many other societies where illegitimate children had no rights at all. So, while not ideal, it wasn't necessarily a complete dead end for these children. Historians still argue about the prevalence and social acceptance of polygamy and concubinage across different regions and periods of the Viking Age. While sagas and legal texts mention these practices, it's unclear how widespread they were beyond the elite classes, and how much social friction they genuinely caused within families. The adoption of Christianity later certainly curtailed these practices, as monogamy became the sole accepted form of marriage. The motivation behind polygamy and concubinage for men was often tied to power, prestige, and the desire for more children, particularly sons. Having many children, especially male ones, demonstrated a man's virility and ensured the continuation of his lineage, which was crucial in a society where high mortality rates were common. It could also be a way for powerful men to integrate women from conquered territories or to exert control over thralls. For the women involved, their experiences would vary widely. A concubine might gain some security and status by bearing a powerful man's child, even if she wasn't his legal wife. For thralls, bearing a child to their master could sometimes lead to their freedom or improved conditions, though they remained in a highly vulnerable position. So, as you observe a powerful Jarl Earl with his family, including children by different mothers, you understand the complex dynamics at play. The legitimate wife held the highest status, but her household might be a microcosm of nuanced relationships. Polygamy and concubinage illustrate a facet of Viking society where male power allowed for varied family structures, creating a hierarchy of female status and challenging, for some women, the traditional expectations of a singular, exclusive partnership. It was a stark reminder that even in intimate relationships, power and social standing dictated many realities. Having explored the intricate family dynamics of polygamy and concubinage, let's now shift focus to something more immediate to your personal desirability in the Viking Age: appearance and hygiene. Forget modern beauty standards. Attractiveness in this era was steeped in practicality, health, and a surprising emphasis on personal cleanliness amidst a generally unhygienic world. Imagine walking through a bustling Viking settlement. The air is thick with the smells of peat smoke, livestock, and unwashed bodies. But suddenly, a waft of something surprisingly pleasant reaches you, perhaps the scent of clean linen, or a hint of scented oil. A mainstream historical fact is that despite the common perception of Vikings as dirty barbarians, archaeological evidence and textual sources suggest they placed a considerable emphasis on personal grooming and hygiene, especially compared to some other contemporary European societies. You might joke that your first date outfit probably involved more soap than a medieval monk's entire year. What was considered attractive for both men and women, health and strength were paramount. A robust physique indicated fertility, resilience, and the ability to contribute to a demanding agricultural or raiding lifestyle, pale, sickly complexions were not admired. Rather, a ruddy, sun-kissed appearance suggested a life of outdoor activity and good health. For women, fertility was highly valued, and a healthy figure was seen as a sign of this. For men, a strong build and the ability to wield a weapon were highly desirable traits. Hair and teeth also played a significant role. Clean, well-kept hair, often braided or tied back, was a sign of meticulous grooming. The sagas sometimes mention characters being admired for their beautiful hair. While not every Viking had perfect teeth, dental hygiene was rudimentary, healthy. Strong teeth were crucial for eating the coarse medieval diet and were certainly a marker of health. Archaeological finds have even revealed toothpicks and ear scoops, indicating a daily routine of cleaning. Perhaps the most surprising aspect was their dedication to cleanliness. Vikings regularly used combs, tweezers, ear spoons, and even toothpicks, found in abundance at archaeological sites. They frequented natural hot springs for bathing or constructed simple saunas in their homes. Soap, made from animal fat and ash, was used for washing both body and clothes. Imagine the steam of a longhouse sauna, a ritual space for cleansing both body and perhaps spirit. This focus on personal cleanliness made someone more appealing, not just aesthetically, but also as a healthier, more pleasant companion. Historians still argue whether this emphasis on hygiene was primarily for aesthetic reasons, for practical health benefits even if they didn't understand germ theory, or as a cultural marker distinguishing them from perceived dirty outsiders. A quirkier tidbit evidence suggests that Vikings sometimes lightened their hair, particularly their beards, with strong lye soaps or bleaches, aiming for a fairer, often reddish hue, which was considered attractive. So, the Viking blonde look might have been more a matter of chemical treatment than natural genes. Beyond physical attributes, clothing also contributed to appearance. While everyday wear was practical, Vikings had access to finely woven wool, linen, and sometimes silk through trade. Well-made, clean clothing, adorned with brooches or beads, indicated status and care. Jewelry, as we've mentioned, was not just decorative but also a display of wealth and a potential part of one's dowry. Finally, scent was likely important. While personal odors would be stronger than today, the use of scented oils, perhaps from plants or imported resins, could have been employed to mask unpleasant smells and add a subtle allure. So, as you observe the people around you, you begin to understand that attractiveness in the Viking Age was a holistic concept. It wasn't just about superficial beauty, but about robust health, diligent hygiene, and a well-maintained appearance that signaled prosperity and self-respect. In a world that could be rough and often dirty, standing out with a clean body, well-groomed hair, and sturdy teeth made you not just appealing, but a visibly desirable partner, showing that you cared for yourself and, by extension, would care for your family. Having explored the importance of personal presentation, you realize that in a world without dating apps or social clubs, the opportunities for meeting potential partners were largely confined to public gatherings. This brings us to the vital role of feasts, games, and socializing as primary avenues for courtship, where community events were essentially the Viking Age equivalent of a singles mixer. Imagine the bustling atmosphere of a large feast, perhaps held to celebrate a harvest, a successful raid, or a wedding. The longhouse would be filled with light from the central fire, the air thick with the aroma of roasted meat, ale, and lively conversation. People from different families and settlements would gather, offering a rare opportunity for young men and women to observe each other, engage in banter, and subtly gauge interest. A mainstream historical fact is that large public gatherings, such as seasonal assemblies, things, religious festivals, and especially feasts, were crucial social events in Viking Age society, serving as key places for networking, trade, dispute resolution, and also for courtship. You might joke that your best shot at finding a spouse was at a party where everyone was slightly tipsy and trying to impress each other with stories of heroism or boasts of wealth. These events were not just about eating and drinking. They were platforms for displaying social graces, wit, and physical prowess. Young men would engage in competitive games like wrestling, tug of war, or even mock combat, showcasing their strength and skill. Women might demonstrate their crafting abilities, their knowledge of sagas, or their capacity for engaging conversation. These displays were a form of subtle courtship, allowing individuals to signal their desirability to potential partners and their families. Storytelling and poetry were also vital components of socializing. A man skilled at skaldic poetry, able to compose verses praising a woman's beauty or bravery, could be highly admired. Likewise, a woman known for her sharp wit and ability to match a man's cleverness in conversation was considered an attractive intellectual equal. Imagine the thrill of hearing a skald recite verses praising your qualities, or engaging in a lively debate that showcased your intelligence to an appreciative audience. While direct, private courtship was uncommon. Public flirting and playful teasing were part of the social dynamic. Eye contact, subtle smiles, and carefully worded compliments could all convey interest. However, these interactions were always under the watchful eye of family members, ensuring that boundaries were respected and that no one acted in a way that would bring dishonor upon their kin. Historians still argue whether these public displays of affection or interest were genuinely spontaneous or largely performative. Designed to fit within established societal expectations for courtship, a quirkier tidbit, drinking horns, often elaborately carved, played a central role in feasts. The communal sharing of ale or mead from these horns could facilitate social interaction, lower inhibitions, and encourage more open conversation between men and women, becoming a subtle part of the courtship ritual. So, your pickup line might involve politely offering someone a drink from your horn. The Thing assembly gatherings, while primarily legal and political, also served as vital social hubs. People would travel for days to attend, setting up temporary camps, and the social interactions outside the formal legal proceedings were just as important. It was a chance to meet people from other regions, expand your social network, and potentially find a spouse outside your immediate village. So, as you mingle amidst the boisterous laughter and the clinking of drinking horns at a grand feast, you understand that these public events are more than just entertainment. They are essential proving grounds for potential partners. Stages where you subtly demonstrate your worth and assess others. The seemingly casual atmosphere belies a serious underlying purpose, the search for a suitable match. In the Viking Age, feasts, games, and socializing were the arenas where fortunes and futures were often made or lost. In the intricate dance of observation and impression, while feasts and games offered opportunities for courtship, your social standing in Viking society fundamentally dictated your options, often creating immense barriers for those at the bottom. This brings us to the harsh realities faced by outlaws, thralls, and marriage, where social status drastically limited or complicated marriage prospects. Imagine being born a thrall, a slave. In Viking society, your life is not your own. You are property, acquired through capture, debt, or birth. Your opportunities for marriage, especially with a free person, are virtually non-existent, and any relationships you form are entirely at the whim of your owner. A mainstream historical fact is that thralls, or slaves, constituted a significant portion of Viking Age society, and their legal rights, including the right to marry, were severely restricted or non-existent. You might joke, grimly, that your relationship status was firmly set to property of someone else. Thralls could not legally marry free people. Any children born to a thrall woman, regardless of the father's status, were typically born into slavery, while a master might allow two of his thralls to marry in a non-legal sense. This was merely a master's permission for cohabitation, not a legally binding union. It offered no independent rights, no dowry, and no escape from their servitude. The threat of being sold away from a partner or children was a constant, terrifying reality. Outlaws faced a different, but equally grim, set of circumstances. An outlaw was someone banished from society, stripped of their legal rights and protections, often for a serious crime. They lived outside the law, often in wild, remote areas, and could be killed with impunity. For an outlaw, finding a partner, let alone marrying, was incredibly difficult. No free family would willingly allow their child to marry an outlaw, as it would immediately compromise their own social standing and legal safety. Such a union would offer no legal protection, no inheritance rights, and would effectively make the partner an accomplice to the outlaw's precarious existence. Historians still argue about the precise social integration and marital opportunities for freed thralls Jar, while some could, over generations, gain full freedom and potentially marry into lower free classes. The stigma of their former status would likely persist, complicating their marriage prospects and those of their descendants for a considerable time, even for free people. Significant disparities in wealth and social status could make a marriage proposal difficult, while alliances between families of similar standing were common. A relationship between someone of very low free status and someone of high status would be highly unusual and socially frowned upon, unless there were extraordinary circumstances, like a thrall woman bearing a child to a powerful jarl. A quirkier tidbit in some rare cases, sagas depict thralls falling in love, and sometimes a master, moved by their devotion or in exchange for services, might grant a thrall their freedom, allowing them to potentially marry. These were exceptions, however, romanticized for the sake of the narrative and not reflective of the general, brutal reality of slavery. So, your meet cute was likely far less charming and much more about forced labor. For those at the bottom of the social hierarchy, relationships were less about choice and more about survival. A thrall woman might be forced into sexual relations with her master, leading to children who would also be thralls. These were not consensual partnerships, but acts of coercion rooted in power imbalances. So, as you observe the strict hierarchies of Viking society, you understand that while free individuals had complex negotiations for marriage, for those without status, the concept of dating or even legal marriage was largely a cruel fantasy. The lives of outlaws, thralls, and marriage underscore the profound impact of social stratification, revealing a world where your birthright, or your misfortune, often predetermined whether you could ever hope to form a recognized, secure family unit, or if you were condemned to a life of legal and social isolation, even in matters of the heart. After navigating the harsh realities of social stratification and the limited options for some, you finally grasp the ultimate truth about partnership in the Viking Age. It was overwhelmingly about beyond the hearth legacy. Your primary role within a relationship, whether male or female, was to contribute to the family's lineage, prosperity, and survival, not necessarily to achieve personal romantic bliss. Imagine a weathered elderly Viking couple, sitting by the hearth in their longhouse. Their hands are gnarled from years of work, their faces lined with the harshness of life. You see a quiet companionship, a deep understanding forged through shared hardship, but perhaps not the passionate romance celebrated in modern tales. A mainstream historical fact is that in Viking society, the purpose of marriage was primarily socio-economic, to create stable households, produce legitimate heirs, transfer property, and forge alliances that strengthened family units. Personal affection was secondary to these pragmatic goals. You might joke that their wedding vows were less about "I do" and more about "I will efficiently manage the farm and produce strong children." For women, your value within a relationship was strongly tied to your fertility and your ability to manage a household efficiently, bearing healthy children, especially sons, secured the family's future and ensured the continuation of the lineage. Your skills in weaving, cooking, brewing, and managing the thralls, if you had them, were crucial to the economic well-being of the household. A well-run household contributed directly to the family's reputation and wealth, ensuring a strong legacy for future generations. For men, your role was to provide and protect. Your prowess in farming, trade, or raiding, your ability to defend your family and property, and your capacity to lead were all vital contributions to the family's legacy. A man's ability to secure wealth and maintain honor directly impacted his family's standing and their ability to forge advantageous marriages for their children. The concept of a happy marriage was likely tied to stability, mutual respect, and shared success in these endeavors, rather than intense emotional connection. If a couple successfully raised children, managed their farm, accumulated wealth, and avoided feuds, their marriage was considered successful, regardless of the level of romantic love. Historians still argue whether the pragmatic nature of Viking Age relationships led to more stable marriages, as expectations were clearer and less focused on potentially fleeting emotions, or if it simply suppressed individual desires. A quirkier tidbit: Viking burial mounds often contained grave goods, reflecting the deceased's roles in life. For women, these often included keys symbolizing their authority over the household, textile tools, and jewelry, underscoring their crucial role in domestic economy and personal wealth, rather than merely their relationship status. So, your personal legacy was literally buried with you, in the form of your practical tools and treasures. Children were the living embodiment of this legacy. Their upbringing was a joint effort, with both parents instilling skills, values, and an understanding of their place within the family and wider society. The continuity of the family name, the passing down of ancestral lands, and the perpetuation of honor were paramount. Your personal life was subsumed into the larger, unending story of your lineage. So, as you reflect on the Viking Age approach to partnership, you understand that their dating life was a rigorous, often public, process driven by the enduring need for survival and continuity. The unions forged were robust, built on a foundation of mutual responsibility, economic necessity, and the powerful pull of beyond the hearth legacy. It was a world where love might bloom in the quiet moments, but the true measure of a successful relationship was its contribution to the enduring strength and prosperity of the family, ensuring that the saga of your lineage would continue long after your own life's journey came to an end. The sounds of the ancient world are finally fading now, becoming impossibly distant. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer, the murmur of the longhouse, the whispers of sagas by the fire, they are all settling into the quiet depths of the past. Your mind is no longer wandering through bustling marketplaces or hushed longhouses. The weight of those old expectations, the complexities of those ancient connections, is gently lifting. You are here, now, safe in your own space. Feel the softness beneath you, the cool air on your skin. There's nothing left to worry about, nothing to analyze, just the quiet calm of your room, drawing you deeper into peaceful rest. Let the stories melt away, leaving only the soft hum of the fan, or the distant murmur of the night. Sleep now, deeply and serenely. End of script. Sweet dreams.